After an incredible weekend of football, we're now just days away from the NFC and AFC championship games. DraftKings' Mike Golic Jr. joins me to break down Bills Chiefs, Commanders Eagles, and tell us what the Seahawks can learn from the NFL's Final Four. Let's light them up.
I'm Jacson.and, and this is Cigar Thoughts.
Welcome back to the Cigar Lounge. I am Jacson.and, and along with my pugnacious producer, Mike Barwin, this is the Cigar Thoughts podcast. And look, we had some very entertaining football games last week, and I can't wait to get Golic's thoughts on them. But before we do, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors. Cigar Thoughts is proud to be partnered with Seattle Cigar Concierge and Glenfiddich Single Malt Scotch Whiskey, two companies whose products I enjoy on a regular basis. And look, by now you know the deal. The Cigar Thoughts cigars are fantastic, and it's not just me saying so. The feedback has been awesome, and you can get your own bundle of 10 for just $149 using the link on the show page or going to cigarthoughtsnfl.com. They're an excellent way to kick back and enjoy, and they make a great gift for the stogie lover in your life. Now, Mike and I love doing the show, and there are two ways y'all listening and watching can help support it so that we can keep the episodes coming. One is by purchasing the cigars, and the other is by subscribing to our YouTube channel at Cigar Thoughts, where you can watch full episodes as well as the funny and insightful clips that Mike puts together. Give a thumbs up to the stuff you like, and let us know what you think in the comments. And of course, you can listen to us everywhere you get your podcasts. Well, the Divisional Round of the NFL playoffs is one of the best sports weekends of the year, and I'd say it gave a pretty good accounting of itself. The Chiefs held off the Texans, the Commanders stunned the Lions, the Eagles narrowly escaped the Rams, and the Ravens dropped a close one to the Bills. That's got me thinking about two things above all else. Who will win the Super Bowl, and what can the remaining four teams teach a Seahawks team that hasn't been this far in a decade? Fortunately, I don't have to do it alone. I'm thrilled to be joined by one of the most entertaining people talking about the NFL today. He was an All-American offensive lineman for Notre Dame, spent time in the NFL, and currently hosts the popular Gojo and Golic podcast for DraftKings. Most importantly, he's back in the Cigar Lounge. He is Mike Golic Jr. Mike, how you holding up, buddy?
I'm doing all right. I appreciate you having me back and being gentle with me today as we talked off air. I am fresh off of just under 24 hours spent in Hartsfield Jackson Airport coming off. You mentioned the Divisional Round always getting this billing, and deservedly so, as maybe the best football weekend of the year. And I think added to that, if you tack on now, because college football expanded its playoff, the fact that we went Saturday, Sunday NFL Division Round games into Monday's CFP National Championship games makes this, I think, firmly, I know some people disagree with the timing for college football, but I think in totality, the best football weekend of the year.
Absolutely. And I think outside of like maybe Masters weekend and the first weekend of March Madness are probably the only two other ones that I'm putting up there. But this upcoming weekend's no slouch either. I mean, this has been, in my mind, one of the better NFL seasons top to bottom in terms both of the quality of the teams at the top mixed in with surprises, but also we've had some incredible individual performances all season long, some really historic stuff. And, you know, we're left with something. I feel like whoever comes away with the Lombardi Trophy has really, really earned it, because it is not an easy path for any team this year.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I think there's something for everybody in this field right now, because I think if you're, football X's and O's junkie looking at all of this, and we'll certainly talk about some of the things that we've seen, evolutions of players like Josh Allen and the way that he's honed his game over these years in Buffalo to become this, more mistake-free version of himself that's elevated the rest of this offense. Jaden Daniels in one of the most prolific rookie quarterback seasons of all time. An Eagles team that brought in Saquon Barkley off the scrap heap in New York after, a tenure marred more by injury and a lack of consistency for the team overall there, and turned him into, the second coming of Barry Sanders. And then, of course, you got the Kansas City Chiefs sitting there waiting for the three-peat, continuing to just go and tinker with the receiver room that never feels quite right, an offense that feels like post Tyreek Hill, it still can't find the full go button anymore, and yet we look up and they're always one of the final four remaining. We're always playing the Arrowhead Invitational, and so however you slice it, there is something really interesting and juicy about this weekend and the four teams that are left with the potential to win this thing.
Oh man, it absolutely true. And I feel like with this season specifically, I mean, we saw three of the most impressive QB seasons in recent memory. It's just that Joe Burrow is kind of left off the dance card despite doing everything possible. And then he's got Jamar Chase. How crazy is it that this NFL, two teams that didn't make the playoffs this year were a 10-win Seahawks team, crazy win 10, don't get in, and a Bengals team that had the league's leading passer, a Triple Crown winner at wide receiver, and the sacks leader, and they didn't even make the playoffs. I mean, there was maybe fewer all-time great type of teams, although that's always kind of tough to say in the middle of the season, but the depth of good teams felt deeper than it has in a very long time.
Yeah, and I think like a real interesting styles make fights situation, right? Where you had teams like we just saw, the Washington Commanders and the Detroit Lions play in the last round, who both had offenses that could shred you every which way. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers this year with one of Baker Mayfield's most productive seasons as an NFL quarterback in that mix. And then you've got, I call them the easy button teams like the Eagles and the Buffalo Bills, where they just decided we are going to whittle football down to its simplest form and go blunt force trauma on both sides of the ball to try and give ourselves the best chance to build a team that can win games like we saw last weekend where, hey, the elements are involved at some point, the weather starts to get colder, all that stuff that we hear, but we can win it a lot of different ways. And I think we've seen the value of that over the last couple of seasons, especially while teams have tightened things up, invested in offensive lines, put more on the running game against lighter defenses, and use that to make deep and successful postseason runs.
Yeah, and it really was last weekend. Like, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I thought the Commanders were going to run the Lions out of the building, but I did expect that to be a track meet, and that's not some brilliant insight. That it was one of the highest playoff over-unders, certainly in recent memory. But things did, the other three games did kind of go. In fact, all four games from a pace and style standpoint kind of went the way that I was hoping and expecting. And before we get to these games that are coming up, a few things that kind of stood out from that last weekend. One, I think, was like Patrick Mahomes' heel turn, right? I've always been a Patrick Mahomes guy, of course. Like, oh, yeah, I mean, congratulations. You like filet mignon, like way to go out on a limb. But he's like reached a point that Brady got to where he went from being the plucky backup like Brady did, and surprised with the Super Bowl, and oh my gosh, there's two, and by the time he has three, it's like, okay, let's get rid of these guys, and good news, everyone, only 15 years left. And it's like, Mahomes has been so easy to root for, even as the Chiefs kind of haven't, but the combination of him getting those two personal foul calls that were both very sketchy. And I'm not someone who feels like the refs out, are trying to do one thing or another in a game. But you combine that with the flop when he just turns into Grayson Allen going out of bounds. And all of a sudden it was like, come on, man, you're winning this game. You're the better team. Like, I get that you're trying to leverage the edges, but that's what we saw from the Patriots all the time too. Like, how much can we deflate the football? Like, can we sneak somebody into an opposing practice? It's like, y'all don't need to do that. You're the best team.
Well, I think we have reached the oversaturation point, right? And this happens with the Patriots. This happened with the Golden State Warriors. Think about how likable Steph Curry was. And by the end, people hated the shimmy. People hated seeing him chew on his mouthpiece and all this stuff. At some point, everyone else who's not rooting for that team hates hearing about how good it is. It's like if you have a buddy who's got some great jobs and loves sitting around telling you how much money he makes all the time. He can be the nicest guy in the world, but at some point you're going to be like, all right, let's talk about anybody else at this point in the conversation. And so that's sort of where we're at with the Chiefs. And to your point about Mahomes, I don't think there's anything nefarious with the refs here either, but they have been involved in so many big games and have won so many big games and have done so, especially in the last couple of years, more so in the margins. Certainly defense goes a long way in that and what Steve Spagnuolo has done on that side of the ball. But offensively, even this season, it's been about critical moments, third down, doing really well on third downs, not blinking late in the game when presented with these opportunities, all these ways that are a lot harder for, talking heads in the middle of the day to go out here and make sense of to everyone, and for the average fan to sit here and try and go through with a fine-tooth comb, because they don't make it as obvious as some of these other really good teams. You watch Baltimore, man, that one goes, that guy goes faster than everybody else and he's throwing it great right now. That guy's bigger than everyone else, but still runs really fast. They run a bunch of cool stuff. Josh Allen's a runaway moose playing football. Like, it's easier to look at right now and identify with a lot of these other teams. It's a little harder with the Chiefs. And so what do people go to then? Tay Voodoo, the referees, all of these explanations of the unseen that we can't get to because we have to somehow keep explaining the way this team keeps reinventing themselves.
Yeah, it's and it's funny too because the calls, and not to spend too much of the show on this, but it feels like the calls all go the Chiefs' way, and there's a million terrible memes out there about the Chiefs and the refs and all these things. I believe it was Ryan Russillo said on his pod recently. He said here. Chiefs opponents have had 48 penalties called against them in the fourth quarter and overtime of Chiefs playoff games in the last 5 years. So 48 for the opponents. How many do you think have been called against the Chiefs?
40?
47.
All right.
Yeah. It is 48 to 47, right? So, it happens in big moments, but also our memories are colored by the outcome. Right. Yes. The outcome is a lens that we look backwards through, and whatever color that lens is how we see everything that happened before it. And that lens has been deeply red for a long time, but it was also like this is a great team. And your point about oversaturation is a good one because, could you imagine if the second most famous player on the team started dating the most famous pop star in the world? That would make it almost unbearable, wouldn't it?
It's so true. And we went through that initial wave where we had, all of the bad actors that were just mad that a woman was around football. But now it's got to the point where it is just another thing that draws even more people. I forget who I saw bring this up the other day, but they're like, you got the Swifties as fans too. Like as if you didn't have enough stuff going your way.
Exactly.
Now you've got this army. Of young fans who can go out here and support your team. Because your star tight end is dating their idol, which is incredible.
Yeah, and honestly, it's probably the best thing that's ever happened to the league's bottom line since they started televising games. It's just been it's been awesome. But yeah, that to me, like even I got the ick with Patrick Mahomes in that game for the first time. So that was kind of the number one thing that stood out to me. But from those other three games, is there anything else that you were just like, man, can't stop thinking about that, or man, that really surprised me?
Well, I think just in general, like the premium on playing mistake-free football in this round really came to the forefront. Like, it's your point. We knew that the Commanders-Lions game was going to be a shootout. We didn't think that Jared Goff was going to have one of those games that we saw from Sam Darnold earlier in the postseason where all of a sudden, hey, now it wasn't all on him, right? Like one of those first turnovers comes off a uncharacteristic sack on a TE stunt on the left side of that offensive line. But then Goff airmails one, puts it in harm's way, and you got a quarterback on the other side who's displaying all that poise as a rookie. And
unreal.
You get back to it with that point. The Baltimore and Buffalo game, Josh Allen continuing the trend from this season of a guy who we saw make some of the most embarrassing turnovers in postseason history early in his career, now being the one that can avoid it, while Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens on the other side are the ones breaking serve, making mistakes, interception, fumble, the drop by Mark Andrews that everyone's going to talk about here. And so it goes back. That was the Patriots for years. All they were going to do was return volley to you every time and get you to make that mistake. And it's just interesting to see the teams now that are able to do that, one led by a rookie in the Washington Commanders and the other led by Josh Allen, who's made one of the more incredible turns in terms of developing his game of any quarterback that we've ever seen.
Yeah, no question. And, it's interesting that the four teams who gained the most yards in their games this past weekend all lost. But the four teams that had the higher turnover ratio all won. And it's one of those things that just, like, to your point, games shorten in the postseason typically. It just, players take a little bit longer, coaches take a little bit longer, and that magnifies the big plays. It magnifies the importance of scores. It magnifies the importance of turnovers. And you're right. I think that was the thing that stood out to me the most as an overarching theme, was really protecting the downside had more to do with success than reaching your upside as an offense, right? And because the Lions had one of the highest success rates in, like, the history of playoff football, and still lost by 2 scores because you had 5 turnovers. You're just not going to win with 5 turnovers. I'll tell you what, man, for all of the hype that I felt, I couldn't remember, certainly a non-championship weekend game I was more excited about than this year's Bills-Ravens matchup. I thought the game of the weekend was Eagles-Rams. I am so impressed by the job that Les Snead and Sean McVay have done. And it kills me as a Seahawks fan to say that, but, like, also it would be dishonest of me not to look at this team that was so insanely young last year and then made the playoffs and almost beat the Lions. And then the most dominant defensive player of the last decade retires. They just recreate him in the aggregate in one draft and coach up these dudes. They start 1-4, and here they are with a minute left and a chance to beat the Eagles in Philadelphia to go to the NFC Championship game. I'm just blown away.
We didn't talk about Aaron Donald at all this year, I feel like.
Isn't that insane?
Insane how little we uttered 99's name when it came to talking about this Rams team. And we had injuries to talk about during the year and all these different things. But going into this game, you're right. The story was, look at what this young defensive line had accomplished. The team that went from F them picks to now nailing all of the picks is another one of these insane transformations. And it's an organization that really, from the top down, everyone you just mentioned has such a clear indication of not just their identity overall, but who do we want to and need to be this year? How do we adjust to what we've got personnel-wise? And I think you saw, them bringing in Jared Verse and Braden Fisk, 2 guys that had familiarity with each other, that both could then go out there and play off that, continue to develop that relationship in a way that would help the D-line, to your point, build an Aaron Donald in the aggregate the way they did. So it was fun to hear about all that. And God, we got so many glimpses of what it looked like when Puka and Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford and Kyron Williams were all healthy at the same time here. But I felt like in the lead up to this game, especially given the opponent with the Philadelphia Eagles, I heard all these stats, and we were talking so much about the Rams' defensive performance against the Vikings and how much they got after Sam Darnold with sim pressures and blitzers from all over the place. And you had, like, I think 10 or 12 different guys that logged the pressure in that game. And I was just sitting there, and it's like, I think someone does the meme. I think it's Christian Bale from I forget which one, but it's like, now show me it with after your opening script or whatever like that.
Right. Yeah,
I wanted to be like, now show me the stats about the Rams' run defense, because I feel like no one was bringing that up, and I'm looking at the Philadelphia War Machine on the other side going, they're just going to hand the ball off a million times and make every one of these pass rush statistics about how great Jared Verse has been or how awesome Kobe Turner is completely meaningless by taking the air out of the football, and it's exactly how that game went, more or less.
And that's it, right? And it is the revival of the competent running game in this year's NFL that I think is a huge storyline, because we've seen this trend of the devaluation of running backs. And if you're going to win, it's all about your quarterback. It's all about your passing offense. And no question, that is still a huge part of it. But when you get to January and games are cold and players are tired and it's hard to breathe and you can't feel your fingers, you've been there. You've had your hands in that icy dirt. When you have a Saquon or a Derrick Henry or a Josh Allen, when you're able to just lean on an opponent that way, at some point the dam breaks. And that's just what we saw with the Rams. They still almost came back and won, but the dam just broke. And even when Jalen Hurts hurt his knee and was essentially, just couldn't really do much in the second half, he had 70 rushing yards in the first half. It was very clear that the Eagles were a team that said, okay, if this is how we need to beat you, this is how we're going to beat you. And that to me is really impressive, is, get you a man who can do both. they've got impressive weapons in the passing game, and they just didn't need them on Sunday.
And they haven't really needed them all year. Like, think about the most impressive Eagles passing game came the week after we were all like, hey, is their passing attack too simple? Hey, is Jalen Hurts really as good as the guy we saw a couple years ago? Right. And then they went out and A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith both had 100-plus yards receiving in that next game, and Jalen Hurts got to sit up there with the Kangol hat on at the press conference and be like, are you not entertained? And then we just sort of shoved it away, even though the Eagles' formula all year long has been one of the most run-reliant offenses in the NFL, one of the most run-heavy run-to-pass ratios in the league. And all the teams you just mentioned, like looking at a larger trend and how this fits in, because there were a lot of people that wanted to make this a, running backs matter again conversation. And everyone's like, no, it's not really that simple. And then it's, well, hey, look at the offensive lines. And I think the offensive line coaches, which now we're getting warmer here. Philadelphia has got grade A top choice beef that they have curated. They have found the rare body types. Like, you know this, you look at any football team and look at the body types that are the least accessible and the most rare when you're trying to find them. It's finding 4 across of 6'5", 6'6", 350-plus pound guys that can all go pull and get out in space the way the Eagles offensive line can, that can dip and bend and dig guys out the way Spencer Brown and this Bills offensive line can. And when you've got guys like Jeff Stoutland, one of the best teachers in the NFL, Aaron Cromer in Buffalo, who's done a phenomenal job helping get guys like Spencer Brown paying their best football, you've got that. But then the final boss on top of it is all the teams that we're talking about here, when you go and look at like yards before contact per rush, is one of the closest to like an offensive line stat there is. How many yards per play is the running back getting before he's even touched in the game? And when you look right now, Baltimore, first in that stat. Philadelphia, third in that stat. Washington, fourth in that stat on the season. Detroit, sixth. All of them, with the exception of Detroit, mobile quarterbacks who are involved in the running game as well, that completely changed the math. And so I don't feel like we can undersell that enough either. Someone had the still frame of, I think it was Lamar Jackson from the other weekend, where he holds the ball on the backside and you've got a D-end, a linebacker, and I think even a safety, all 3 little ducks in a row sitting there staring at him, watching the running back go the other way with much more favorable numbers. And so you've got a combination of these great running backs going to teams that had quality personnel on the offensive line, but then also schematically had a bunch of things they could throw in there in addition to having the ultimate weapon, which is a quarterback that's a plus in the run game that has made each of these teams a nightmare to try and defense.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, because, you know, it is awesome if you can go out there and whip the ball around the field. That just gets harder to do this time of year. And, you know, this is an extreme example, but last year in the first round of the playoffs, the Miami Dolphins played a game in Kansas City that was over 120 degrees colder than the hottest game they had played that year, right? And everything that they do, and I'm fascinated. I would like to see the Mike McDaniel experiment work. I think it's very fun, but you need conditions to be favorable in order to win with that type of football. And much like the way that the Patriots went, like the Chiefs have kind of gone the opposite way, where the Patriots won their first 3 Super Bowls with rushing and defense, and then kind of timely passing, some big moments from Tom Brady. But that was a run and tackle team.
Yep.
And then for the back half of their dynasty, it was, let's set all the records, let's wing it around, let's score 40 points a game. Well, the Chiefs came up doing that.
Yes.
And now they have somehow found a way to completely re-identify themselves and win a completely different type of football. And that to me is like the ideal, the platonic ideal of building a football team is, can you win both styles of games? Can you win indoors, and can you win when it's 10 degrees? And we don't know if Washington can do that yet. We might find out this weekend. It's looking like it's going to be pretty cold, but the other 3 teams can do that.
Yeah, they can. And Kansas City, I mean, they're the most interesting case study, because you're right. They started off as the 07 Patriots, and then they worked their way back to the early 2000s version. And also, by the way, the late stage Patriots, the ones that the early Patrick Mahomes-led Chiefs had to contend with, that were going to run power eye football, try and take possessions away. They could still put up a ton of points because Tom Brady was the quarterback. But
I mean, didn't LeGarrette Blount have like 18 touchdowns? I think the year that they beat Seattle, and he had like 3 in the AFC Championship game. I mean, they didn't fuck around with you.
No, they were not going to play with their food at that point in time because they knew what they had to be given the skill weapons that were or weren't on that roster. And for Kansas City, that's been the same adjustment that they've made. But again, going back to our point, they built one of the most lethal interior offensive lines in the NFL, even though the tackle situation's been difficult to kind of wrap their arms around all season long, to the point where now, thankfully, because Joe Thuney is such a good, smart, capable player, they kicked the guy out to tackle against one of the best defensive fronts in the NFL. And it wasn't perfect by any means. It wasn't perfect when they played in the regular season. But the fact that that's even a tool in your bag for Andy Heck and this group to be able to go out and pull out in a situation like that, and to have the trust of the rest of that group, to have the trust of your quarterback, to all be able to work off and around that, your play caller and Andy Reid, to be able to throw a little bit more help that way, it just speaks to, again, what you talked about, the malleability of that roster in particular, year in and year out, game in and game out, quarter in and quarter out.
Yeah, the last thing I want to do before we look ahead to the matchups, because this is a wildly entertaining championship weekend in my eyes, is I just want to. I'm not going to pour it out, but I'm gonna take a sip in memoriam of the Detroit Lions, the most fun team. I am willing to chalk it all up to the defensive injuries that they lost that game. And that's not to take anything away from what Dan Quinn is doing, from what the Commanders are doing, from Jaden Daniels, who is the least rookie-looking rookie quarterback I can ever remember watching. But it's just got to be so tough. Obviously, there's so much made about the drought and how tough life has been for that city for a long time. And this was a chance to kind of really elevate that city. And I think they were the best team all year. Sucks to see them go out with so many guys already in a body bag.
Yeah, it was. And certainly the offensive mistakes. They knew at that point how they had to win games. They had to go out and be so offensively better than everyone that the offense is no doubt going to look at that and say, we fell below our standard in that game. But defensively, you're right. It was just a sieve. There was no resistance meant for Washington at any point in that game. And that's just a really hard way to live life, given the fact that, again, we talked about Washington can stress you in such unique ways because Jaden Daniels at quarterback might be the best athlete south of Lamar Jackson in the NFL at that position. So it is just a different level that you have to account for there. And you're right. Detroit had nothing left in the tank here, which sucks because even with the body of that game, Ben Johnson, what that team's getting ready to do, by the way. No Ben Johnson, no Aaron Glenn.
No.
You're talking about your offensive line coach. Again, another one of the really quality offensive line coaches in Hank Fraley, potentially being someone that I think the Seahawks are looking at the offensive coordinator job. So the brain drain around there, kind of akin to what we've seen at some of these other teams, Philadelphia after their Super Bowl run in 2022, how Dan Campbell, this leader of men, is all of a sudden going to go out there and replace these two incredible commodities at coordinator that they've been able to keep inside the family there during this run and during their rebuild into one of the more prominent teams in the league.
Yeah, no question. Well, look, Lions fans, Dan Campbell, all you guys, here's to you. I hope you're back next year. It's just so goddamn fun watching them play football. And but you know what? I think the only team with vibes anywhere close to what Detroit had this year is the Commanders, who have a total cultural reset. In the post Dan Snyder era, you couldn't get off to a better start. And it's funny, certainly ironic, that Ben Johnson was essentially offered the head coaching job for the Commanders, turned it down to stay with Detroit. And the guy they settled for is the one that ended his career in Detroit. I mean, that's football.
That is, it is. You can't script it much better than that. It's why the NFL scriptwriter commercial is one of the better moves that they've made in a while.
Absolutely.
But it's, and I mean, that part's cool to see. I mean, there's an even more macro conversation as right now we're in the throes of the coaching hiring season where, we had Ben Johnson's introductory press conference already.
What an awkward part of the calendar that is.
Oh my, well, awkward part of the calendar, but also awkward too, the Matt LaFleur shot in there. I don't know if they're boys and that's something they can do, but man, for all this stuff, I don't feel like we know Ben Johnson at all. And that's sort of part of, getting to know all these people as head coaches here. There was a 2-year stretch where I couldn't pick Zach Taylor out of a lineup and he was the coach of one of the best teams in the NFL. I always said he looks like a stock week character, But for Ben Johnson, lead dog and just go right up, be like, I love beating Matt LaFleur twice a year and name checking him while you show love to KOC and your old boss is a wild move to start things off. So at the very least, for people that were wondering, hey, would this guy be a little bit more bookish? He's turned down a couple of these jobs. Ben Johnson said, no, I'm coming out swinging. Fuck that.
Yeah, totally. Exactly. And it's funny because, here in Seattle, we went through a similar thing where it's like, okay, Mike Macdonald is clearly the leading mind among defensive coordinators outside maybe Steve Spagnuolo right now. And what do we know about him?
Yep.
Nothing really. And so we had to go through that process, and he's shown some personality and some things like that, but he's more or less the button down kind of defensive coordinator that we expected. Ben Johnson reached into the bag, pulled out a chip, and went knuckles deep in the dip on his first public. Like, he's putting it out there. And you know what? That's exactly what Dan Campbell did when nobody knew who he was. He went out there and gave the presser of a lifetime to start out. So I respect it for sure. I think if you're the Bears, you're looking for any juice you can. I think it's a home run hire. I think, I don't know if at the time that we're recording, if Aaron Glenn is officially the Jets, head coach yet or not, but it sounds like they're pretty much going to make that happen. So, it's interesting because, like I'm fond of saying on this show, is you can't just make the lateral assumption that because they were good as a coordinator, they're going to be good at all of the things it takes to be head coach in the NFL. It's like, just because you are the top salesperson doesn't mean that you're going to be a great CFO. Just because you are excellent as the head of HR doesn't mean you're going to be a great CEO. Some of it transfers, but lots of it doesn't. So that part's going to be really interesting to see. But, speaking of the Commanders, they've got to go into Philadelphia now. Like, they got the conditions they wanted. Obviously, Detroit, difficult place to play, but from an actual physical standpoint, dome, turf, defense that's beat up, we're going to lean on our skill position players and just race you to the finish line. I don't think they're going to be able to do that on Sunday.
I don't think so either, especially I saw, the day we're recording this, Quinyon Mitchell said he's going to go this weekend, too, for Philadelphia. So having that defense continue to be healthy, and just coming off the game we had where against the Rams, earlier in the season when the Eagles had played, Jalen Carter logged one pressure in that game. He had 2 sacks and one huge spot to end that game, and was just yet another addition into the dominant show of force that's been the Philadelphia Eagles defensive front over this run through the postseason. And so I think the way that group has played going up against a Washington offensive line that now is going to be down. Sam Cosme, unfortunately, suffered that knee injury in the last round, guy who'd been playing really good ball for them at guard. I think that attrition, the fact that the O-line down the back half of the season hadn't looked quite as effective as it had at the beginning of the season, combined with what Saquon Barkley and that offense can do on the other side here, I do think that this one is a different animal entirely in a way that I don't know if Washington is yet ready for.
If the Commanders do win this game, how do they do it?
I think get out to a hot start early. Like, I'd love to see what it looks like. And I know we just talked about it. The Eagles have flexed that passing muscle at times. It's still not an overly complex passing attack. And so could you force them into a more down in, down out, drop back style of game by having Jaden Daniels get the ball early, go right down and score, having that defense force turnovers like they did against one of the best offenses in the NFL in Jared Goff. And now all of a sudden, well, Jared Goff and the Lions could go out there then and keep going up and down the field here. Is Philadelphia, whose explosive plays have tended to come more in the run game, going to be able to go and throw themselves into it? That's at least the chance you got to take, because again, if you give Philly the chance to stay on schedule, they're going to boa constrictor the hell out of you.
Yeah. This to me, when I was thinking about this game, this is one of those rare ones where if I'm Washington and I win the opening coin toss, I think I take the ball instead of deferring. I think that's exactly it, because you can't let a team like the Eagles get the big stack at the poker table, because they will lean on you. They are not going to make frivolous bets. They're not going to chase inside straights with big money. They are just going to double your bet every single time around the table until you have cards to beat them. And I think it's going to be really important that Washington try and get the big stack of poker chips early in this game and force Philadelphia to get away from what they want to do. I am a big Jalen Hurts believer. I would say that's probably the biggest delta between my opinions and those of my guests, is that I know he's limited as a passer. I think he does so much else from a mobility standpoint, decision-making standpoint, a leadership standpoint to more than compensate for that. And I don't think he's a bad passer, certainly, but he's not elite. But if he plays, he's going to be playing on one leg. And so it's going to be really difficult for him to just drop back and try and wing it around a snowy field.
Well, I mean, you saw the way the Eagles came out in the last game. The first touchdown was on a bash run where Jalen Hurts was the guy they were blocking for, trying to go out and make it happen. So, and we saw last year, I think, I know I should say this. I think we talked about it enough in real time, but as we did the post-mortem on the Eagles last year, Jalen Hurts and his knee and whatever injury he had all of last season being markedly less effective. He's not the most dynamic athlete in the world, but he's a tough runner. He's capable enough. How much that changes the Eagles' offense cannot be overstated. So I think you're absolutely right with him there. And then on the other side for Philadelphia, what's your choice as far as how much you want to go after Jaden Daniels?
I was just going to ask you that. Yes.
And sacking him there, because you look in week 11, I just went and looked this up on Next Gen Stats. The Eagles in week 11 blitzed just 5 times against the Commanders. It was the lowest blitz rate that Jaden Daniels had faced in any game in his career, because as we went over in the last game against the blitz, and the Detroit Lions had no other choice. They were going to have to go out there and do that. That's how they lived.
You can't sit back and play assignment football with your practice squad.
No, it's just not happening. When you've got, a guy wearing 69 playing the edge and not doing it ironically the way that some fat guy with a mullet usually does on a team. That's kind of our lot in life. If you're one of the fat guys with like a single bar face mask.
That was Brock Lesnar's number with the Vikings, right?
Right. That's what you're supposed to go out and do, not an athlete wearing that number on the edge just because he showed up here a little while ago. But I think because they had no other choice, Philadelphia does, and Jaden Daniels has shown himself to be one of the best quarterbacks against the blitz we've ever seen as a rookie. And so do you want to court that kind of chaos, knowing what him and that downfield passing attack with Terry McLaurin are capable of if you give them too many bites at the apple?
Yeah, I think if I'm Vic Fangio, I am kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, because you've already tried not blitzing him. And granted, game script's a little different, because in that game, Jalen Hurts got hurt early, and it was Kenny Pickett. And so I think that game ended up being 35-31 or something, much higher scoring than I anticipated being this Sunday. I just wonder how much I come after him. And he is planning to torture this poker analogy further. He has an incredible hand with the 4 guys that he has up front, and the 4 guys behind those 4 guys up front in terms of subbing those dudes out. I think that you can create a lot of trouble for Jaden Daniels and still be good against the run while keeping 7 or even 8 guys back in coverage.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And so from there, the question sort of becomes, all right, then how do you overcome that? And what do you go after if you are the Commanders on offense? And I think we saw the answer in the last game, and really ever since Nakobe Dean went down, was Oren Burks, right? That's the one place you look at the linebacker level and go, Zach Bond's been this incredible story, the way that they use him both on the edge of the line and the off-ball stuff. Ben Solak did a great piece over at ESPN talking about some of the Eagles fronts and the way that they've deployed Zach and that unique skill set. But for Oren Burks, that's the guy that's all right, we're going to keep on testing and see if you're going to continue to hold up this way. And so with the amount of 2-back stuff that we've seen from the Commanders over the course of this season, having the way they've used Eckler and Brian Robinson together, especially Eckler as an extension of the short passing game that's sort of part of the run game, all that stuff that are tools they have in their bag for Cliff Kingsbury to try and counteract that. And so that's going to be the tug of war. But I'm with you. If I'm the Philadelphia Eagles, I'm saying your offensive line's a little beat up. Our guys are playing like war daddies up front right now. Let me turn Jalen Carter and the rest of these guys loose and see if you can block them for the entirety of the game right now.
On the flip side, if you're Dan Quinn, who, just a credit to him and the journey of reinvention that he undertook in between his stints as head coach. I was hearing the other day about how he essentially hired a specialist who's very connected to coaches and GMs across all sports. This woman whose name I don't have in front of me, unfortunately, because I thought this was so cool, went and basically interviewed like 30 to 40 people that knew Dan Quinn across these sports and said, hey, what do you think he does well? What do you think he struggles with? Former players, all of these things. And then went back to Dan Quinn and said, hey, here's the feedback. Didn't assign any names to it. It was all anonymous, but here's the feedback. And Dan Quinn took that to heart. And I mean, the proof is in this pudding, right? I mean, that's incredible. I thought they'd be picking in the top 5 again. Even if Jaden Daniels hit, I was like, okay, there will be some promise, and then maybe they're plucky next year. No, they're fucking good already. But now he has a big decision. He's still a defensive coach. He has a big decision to make in this game. And he does have a bit of an advantage that Jalen Hurts, who we think is going to play, is going to be limited mobility-wise. If you're him, are you just trying to blitz the shit out of him? Or are you just trying to play assignment correct, fill your gap football, don't let Saquon beat you, and let Jalen Hurts sit in the pocket and try and throw? How are you approaching this?
Yeah, I'm stacking it up. I mean, the last thing you can afford is, I think Saquon Barkley, according to Next Gen Stats, the 6th highest explosive run rate of any running back in the league. And quite honestly, that feels low. Now, maybe it's just we've got Rams on our brain where I think he's had 4 runs of 60-plus against the Rams in their last 2 games.
That's because I think when we hear explosive, we think 60-yard runs, and I think it's defined as 12-yard runs.
Right, exactly.
So like, if you raise the threshold to like 30-yard runs, we're going to see Saquon move up that list quite a bit.
Exactly. But, that's the head of the snake you have to cut off there. And to do that, you've got to outman them, because while the Eagles can do a lot, like Cam Jurgens is another in a line of smaller athletic centers, but even the big guys on their line can get out in the move, get out in the perimeter. We saw Jordan Mailata leading around on one of their counter runs last weekend. And so all of those guys give you a lot of options, but we've seen the Eagles just line up and run inside zone, run outside zone, keep it pretty simple up front because they've got an absolute meat wagon they can roll through you. So you got to defeat that with bodies, I think, if you're Washington. And so that's going to be the route to go there. Now, the notion of trying to stick and cover, even with Marshawn Lattimore and some of the familiarity there, with A.J. Brown, with Devonta Smith, the Eagles' all-time leader at receiving yards in the postseason, which was not a thing that I was prepared to be a stat last week, but a place that we got to. It's not to say that's easy, but again, if you're dealing with a hindered Jalen Hurts and knowing how the Eagles want to win games, that's the way you've got to go and try to beat them.
Do the Commanders have the bodies on defense?
I don't think so. I don't think there are a lot of people that have the bodies to stop Philadelphia up front, and just with the way that those guys are playing right now, and with how Saquon makes them better. Like, it's not to, in this conversation about circumstance helping running back production so much, it's obviously shouldn't obscure the fact that Saquon Barkley is incredible, and the way that he sets up runs, the way his athleticism erases angles. As an offensive lineman, we always, when you're going over a blocking scheme, you get to a certain point where it's like, all right, well, the running back's got to block one. That's usually, the third level defender coming down to fill in the box. And how consistently do we just see guys with a complete lack of understanding of how fast Saquon is, along with how big and bruising he is. And so all of that makes the job of an offensive lineman so much easier. So you combine all those things. And I just think that this is an area right now where Washington is just not equipped for what they're going to face.
Yeah. And just to kind of put a bow on the running back thing, I think where I've kind of settled is a great running back is not going to transform a bad team to a good team.
Yes.
But a great running back becomes a force multiplier for a good team. If your talent, especially on offense, is above a certain threshold, then you can get exponential returns with a great running back. And I think that's true of most positions, but certainly true at running back, because, Saquon's had some injuries in the past, but it's not like all of a sudden he's a totally different athlete than he was in New York. Just there's nothing else going for New York when he was there, right? And so now, same thing with Derrick Henry. Like, that dude was just dragging these Titans teams up and down the field. And it's like, oh, well, let's put you with the most dynamic quarterback of all time behind a good offensive line and a good play caller. It's like, holy shit, here's a 1,700-yard running back again, So, I do think that is kind of the key when it comes to paying a running back. I think you can draft running backs without your team being ready. Like, that's fine. I don't care about that. Draft a running back. Like, get fucking good players in the draft. That's all I care about. Just get good players. I don't care where they play. But if you're going to spend money on a second or a third contract for a running back. You better be in position to take advantage of that. What is your score prediction for this one?
For this one, I am going to go, just take a little sneaky peek at what the line was for this.
Last I saw was 5.5. Philly given 5.5.
All right, I got 6 right here for Philadelphia and over under at 47.5. I'm going to say if the Eagles win this one, I'm going to say they probably do it by keeping under that. So I'll go Eagles 24, Commanders 20.
Okay. That would be fun. That would have us coming down to a final drive. I hope you're right. I don't see it going that way. I do think the Eagles force some mistakes early and just take advantage, limited though they are. Their roster is just so much better than the Commanders roster. And I don't think you could say that about the Bucks or the Lions, who are the two teams that the Commanders beat. Certainly not the version of the Lions that they played last week. To me, this is the best top to bottom roster in the NFL. And while I think they may be giving up some edge when it comes to coaching, I think that they have just way too much goddamn talent for it to matter. Yeah. So I've got I've got 30-19 Philadelphia. I think they get ahead early and just lean on them, and I think that'll be enough. Flipping over to the AFC, here we are again, man. Here we are again. This is Bulls Knicks. I mean, is this the year?
It should be. It should be.
The Bills are the Bills feel like a better team, don't they?
Everything we just said about the Philadelphia Eagles, minus I think the overall defensive prowess, just because the safety room can be had a little bit more for Buffalo, and they've been a little bit more bend don't break, although being somewhat healthier at linebacker now goes a long way. I think in the last round, when they had played Baltimore during the regular season, they hadn't had Terrell Bernard. They hadn't had Matt Milano in that game. And so having those guys, Teron Johnson being back, all definitely made a world of difference there. But I would say offensively, very similar formula. Just saying you add value at quarterback and take it away from wide receiver. Like Khalil Shakir has been awesome this year. You've gotten some production from Keon Coleman. You've certainly got the tight end room there. But that's, you're making up for that lack of talent relative to A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith by adding it to Josh Allen, who is a much better quarterback than Jalen Hurts at this point.
Yes,
and so, yes,
I agree.
They should win this game. They are the better team up front against the Chiefs defense that's still very good, but not last year's Chiefs defense. And defensively, they've been able to get pressure at times with the front four, have guys like Ed Oliver or Greg Rousseau go and be incredibly effective against the Chiefs offensive line that in the interior is built to handle that. But we mentioned had to put arguably their best guard or best interior lineman. You maybe could argue Creed Humphrey for that. And then kick him out at left tackle. So you have mixed up the bag in a way that does invite some of that randomness. That being said, I still can't pick against Kansas City. I don't have that in me right now because I know what this team is capable of, and I know how mental some of these things can be. Getting into a game like this where, yes, there are some new parts year in and year out and some guys in more critical spots, but man, at some point in the second half, if this game is close, there's going to be a real concerted effort, or going to have to be by the Bills on the sideline to avoid that, oh, here we go again feeling that plagues them while the Chiefs just have no conscience during the postseason.
Yeah, when we talk about great teams and specifically about great coaches, a lot of the conversation revolves around culture. And, I was fortunate to play sports at a high level. You were fortunate to play sports at an even higher level. You can speak to it even better than I can. Culture is important. You got to believe in your head coach, and you got to believe in your position coaches that they are giving you an advantage. But I feel like when it comes down to what really sets really great coaches apart, it's their ability to identify their biggest advantage and then be unafraid to hammer on that. And he hasn't reached the top of the mountain yet, but I think Kyle Shanahan is an example of somebody that has a lot of tools at his disposal as a play caller, But there's a reason you see Brandon Ayuk go for 160 one game, and then Deebo Samuel go for 160 the next game, and then George Kittle go for 160 the next game, and then Christian McCaffrey go for 160 the next game. It's because he can identify where the weakness in your defense is and hammer it over and over and over again. Bill Belichick was this way. And Josh McDaniels, to his credit for all his shortcomings, maybe from a culture standpoint, if he sees a mismatch, he'll just go at it 20 times in a game. So I say all of this to set up the following question. If you're the Chiefs, what is the one thing that you're targeting the most on either side of the ball? And then same question for the Bills.
Well, I think if you're the Chiefs, one of the things that you've done well, especially down the stretch, and, we talked about this when Hollywood Brown came back, but I think overall it was this concerted effort by the Chiefs, whether it was the offensive line or just a recognition that their passing attack was not going to develop downfield the way they wanted to. You had the almost pass to Hollywood Brown in the game against the Texans. You've been trying the gadget stuff with Xavier Worthy all year, but it just hasn't contributed in the ways that you expected. The quick passing attack here. Mahomes has been incredible on quick passes this year, according to Next Gen Stats, completed a career-high 83.6% of his quick passes this season. And the Bills on the other side allow the fourth highest completion percentage and the eighth highest success rate on quick passes this season. So you put that together, that's what the Chiefs are going to continue to have to do against a Bills defense that is more bend, don't break than it is overwhelming you in any particular area. And so I do feel like if you're the Chiefs, you got to come out spamming that right away, not give them any time to sink their teeth into your quarterback and try and frustrate that defense that is going to want to cut off the head of the snake for you.
If you're Sean McDermott, you know that going in, right? And I'd be curious to see how much of their measurable struggles against the quick passing game have to do with the fact that they've played with big leads in a lot of games and are happy to give you that. If I'm Sean McDermott, I think I'm going more press coverage and like bringing my safeties down. And if you can beat me over the top, God bless you, but it's going to be cold and it very likely could be windy. And so, Patrick Mahomes, if anyone overcome it, is Patrick Mahomes, but he's not throwing to Tyreek Hill anymore. So I would almost gamble as Sean McDermott and say, you know what? I'm going to make it as hard for you as possible to have all these high percentage 2-second drop back passes. I'm going to make you stand in that pocket and move around and try and beat me over the top. Am I off base there?
No, I don't think so at all. And quite honestly, you could go back to, in that regard, one of the original Chief killing game plans that it used to be. And we saw in the first round, if you want to give Travis Kelce a bunch of room, especially when he's coming off the almost month break that he had between game action, he could still go out there and give you buckets. They're a little bit slower buckets. They're a little bit less dynamic buckets. But they were buckets nonetheless. Over 100 yards and getting into the end zone is what he's done in the postseason.
Yeah, it's year 7 Luka Doncic versus year 1 Luka Doncic.
Right.
Little less explosive, still as effective.
But now it's, hey, at 35 years old, can you go out here and just do it with a week's rest now? Is it going to look the same there? And especially if you get up there and get hands on him quick. Because that was always, even when Tyreek Hill was in the offense, if you wanted to slow down the Chiefs, it was, hey, don't give Patrick Mahomes the easy get-out-of-jail-free card that's always existed for him and the ESP relationship between him and Travis Kelce. So coming off last week, I think that's an easy place to start, too, if you're the Bills, is jam him up there and make one of those receivers that has been less consistent all year long. Make DeAndre Hopkins go out there and make a bunch of contested catches. Make Hollywood Brown, who didn't play till the last few games of the season, be the one to go and beat you. Try and make them extend plays and make this offensive line have to work overtime a little bit and see how that works out for everybody.
Yeah, I was really, really impressed with how the Bills defended Derrick Henry last week. And his final line was nice, right? 16 for 84, over 5 yards a carry, all that stuff. He got all of that on 2 runs in the second half. His success rate was low. And I didn't know the Bills had that in them. I don't think Isaiah Pacheco is anywhere close to being the guy that he was last year. Right now, just coming off the injury, it is what it is, and Kareem Hunt is nice. But I feel like I'm just daring them to beat me that way. Either that or beat me over the top in the elements. And if you do that, I can live with it. And even if that happens early and the Chiefs say, okay, let's do it, and they get a couple of quick scores, the beauty of the Bills is they can be up by 2 scores and grind you to dust, or they can be down by 2 scores and tie it up in a blink.
Yep.
And that's such a nice luxury that I think they're in position to kind of gamble against the Chiefs a little bit on defense.
Definitely. The one thing for Kansas City then is, and I think the last time these two teams played as well, it was, it was week 11 when they played there. Bunch of play action mixed in this, right? We've talked all year about the Bills safety room and the turnover there, and DeMar Hamlin and Taylor Rapp having to shoulder the load. Test those guys with a bunch of play action, even if, to your point, the running back room is not as effective. We know we've got a litany of analytic stats that defy what we know physically about football, but you don't always need to have the most physically effective run game, especially when you're the Chiefs and you like to trot up as much multi-tight end sets as they have over the last couple of years. You get everyone down near there and you dare those safeties and dare that back end to be disciplined enough to not give any of those guys a chance going over the middle of the field, running a bunch of that hard sell play action.
If you're Sean McDermott, do you feel like you have a personnel or strategic advantage anywhere in this game? And if so, what is it? How hard are you leaning on it?
I mean, I think, God, the advantage is the hammer that you carry in the run game. I mean, they just went up against 2 of the top 3 run defenses in almost any metric, EPA per play, rush yards per game, whatever you want, the Denver Broncos and the Baltimore Ravens, and they threw hammers at them. So I feel like going up against the Chiefs defense that, again, is very good, but, Chris Jones in the last game was coming back off a calf injury, and we saw him during that game getting buffed out on the sideline. And while Spags is one of the best bespoke game plan designers in the history of postseason football, an easy way to not give you a chance to really make any of that all that useful is to do what Buffalo does and just put 6 offensive linemen down on the field and run duo and inside zone until the cows come home, because you've got the horses to run in that regard. So I feel like, again, for Buffalo, you've been able to avoid the big mistake. Josh Allen has been able to avoid a lot of sacks because that group is good, and because game script-wise, Joe Brady knows I can always either go to the running back passing game out of the backfield as these lower-risk areas where we're really effective because our foundation is so strong.
Yeah. I think for as high-powered as the Bills' offense is, I think I agree with you. I think the way that you win on – we already talked about how I think they could win on defense. I think the way you win on offense is you try and take the air out of this football, because a lot of times when you have a great quarterback and you talk about doing that, it's like, man, it's kind of fighting with one hand behind your back. But the beauty of Josh Allen, your description of him as a runaway moose is my favorite that I've ever heard. I've heard some great ones for him, is that he can be just as big a part of throwing hammers as James Cook is, as Ray Davis is, as anyone else, right? Like, I mean, they can just run power with Josh Allen. Also, they can do read option with Josh Allen also. And then off of that, you can start faking and throwing over the top. And when you've got 2 tight ends in who are blocking on 70% of the plays, all of a sudden one of them slips up the seam. And Josh Allen is so capable of making that throw.
Yeah, it's not going to quite be Notre Dame running Riley Leonard a million times on an 18-play drive to start the national championship. And God love that kid. Every time he got up, looked like Jason Kelsey getting up from the old tush-push pile, where just a small part of him dies on every play. But there's no doubt. We've seen it with
the fact that he kept the vomit in his mouth for the duration of that 9-carry opening drive is pretty impressive. And I do want to point out, I made the intentional choice out of solidarity with you to wear my old school Irish green shirt. I want it to be known.
It was noticed. It is appreciated, coming off and still having to wear off the pain of both travel issues and of watching my team lose the national championship. But the original point being that while they're not quite going to go that crazy with it, we have seen for all the teams that have running quarterbacks, and we have this dialogue during the regular season all the time with Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen especially, about usage rate with those carries. And I think there was a lot of surprise in that game against Buffalo. How few? I don't think there were. I think I saw Bill Barnwell say there were no designed rushing attempts for Lamar Jackson in that game, or if not, markedly fewer than the game before we saw, where I think he matched his season high. He had a season high of design carries, matched his second most carries in the season, trailing only the first game of the year against the Chiefs. both of these guys, for Josh Allen, it might not be full Riley Leonard, but they're taking the restrictor plate off the Red Dragon and giving it a little more juice
100%.
right now and say, hey,
100%.
let's go at it. If not now, then when, especially against this team.
I tell you what, they're not losing this game because they didn't give Josh Allen a chance to win it.
No, come back with your shield or on it, Spartan. That's this game for Josh Allen.
And you know what? To circle back to the Detroit Lions, the thing that I can tip my hat to them on is they died by the sword.
Yes.
Right? They sure, the Jameson Williams, don't throw the fucking football in that situation. Throw it away or take a 6-yard loss, like whatever. But like, I didn't think there were any kitchen sinks left for Ben Johnson. And he's running pitches off of top sweeps, and he's running all kinds of stuff off a counter and all of these things. It was so cool. And I think that if you're the Bills and you have the nuclear option, then if you lose the war, it's not because you didn't use that, right? What's the final score in this game?
Whew, baby. I'm going to say, I'll say Chiefs 24, Bills 23. Like, I think this one's insane because, again, for all the stuff that we've said, and this shows you, I think exactly underscores, the line of this game is 1.5 points. The Chiefs are at home, the place where the AFC playoffs have run through pretty much every year but last season since Patrick Mahomes took over as a starter. And even the odds makers are like, Buffalo should win this game. They're not even giving them the courtesy 3, but it's still the Kansas City Chiefs. And that's why there's just something about, especially in this matchup, I can't quote right now. This Bills team is great, but I just think in one of those critical moments down the stretch, we have seen this Kansas City Chiefs team, especially in the back half of the season, make just enough plays in the offense, have just enough dynamicism to all of a sudden go and be able to scoop up some of these yards where there can be found against this defense.
Yeah, man. We're in lockstep here. I don't know who's going to win. I just know the final score is going to be 24-20, and the team that loses is the one that turns it over last.
Yep.
Like that's what it's going to be. Whoever forces the final turnover wins this game. And everything that I know intellectually about football, limited though that may be, tells me the Bills win this game. But like I said last week when we had Danny Heifetz on and we were talking about it, if I bet on Patrick Mahomes and I lose, I tip my hat. If I bet against Patrick Mahomes and lose, I feel like an idiot.
Yep. Until further notice.
And for that reason, I got to go 24-20 Chiefs.
It is. It is one of those things. I made that mistake one time. I was the guy all week long in the lead up to the Eagles-Chiefs Super Bowl, walking around Radio Row being like, let me tell you all my smart guy reasons why the Eagles are going to win this Super Bowl.
Jesus, man. They almost did.
They almost did. But then they didn't. Because
oh my goodness, I know it. So we've got these 4 teams. You've been kind enough to really give some detailed thoughts on all 4 of them. They all got here different ways. Are there common denominators with these 4 teams, or even the 4 that lost last week, that teams who are trying to get to this level can look at and say, that's what we need to do?
Yeah, I mean, God, I think we've already beaten into the ground. It's unsurprising given my background here, but you have to figure out the offensive line position. Like, I'm sure we'll talk about this relative to the Seahawks at some point. We can just tie that in right now. I mean, you can make and that's, Ben Johnson and what he's getting ready to take over in Chicago. The biggest delta between what he had and what he has now is the group of 5 guys up front that he got to work with in Detroit that were one of the best in the NFL, and the group that he had this year in Chicago that had Caleb Williams over on the sideline questioning every life decision he made that had brought him to that moment. So it's the hardest thing in the world to do because there are only so many O-line coaches in the NFL that, given the restrictions you have, can go and develop. And so you've got to do a really good job of finding guys in a college game that also has some development issues that get talked about a lot. Finding blue chip guys that can come in right away, do what you need to do, and then find the scheme that works for your personnel. Like, I think of the Rams and Sean McVay as the foremost example of that, where last year they made this decision, hey, we're going to go over here and get Steve Avila and all these thicker bodies in the middle, and we're going to become a duo team, part of this branch of coaches that all cut their teeth running outside zone and boot action off of that, decided, no, we're going to be a duo and hard play action team, and we're going to kill people with that stuff. It is the second part of that, is having a clear identity in the things that you do well. And I think all the teams that we're talking about here right now really have offensive lines that you can trust. Now, again, Washington's is a little beat up, but they were part of the story this year, as we mentioned, for the vast improvement of this team. And so I think having that, and then having an identity in terms of what your guys are capable of and what they do best, whether that's getting them on the move or getting them downhill like the Buffalo Bills, and giving them as many opportunities as you can.
Yeah, and I mean, you were kind enough to give me the lead into the Seahawks here. They're searching for an offense coordinator right now, and I told a buddy, I don't care if God herself is the offensive coordinator. If you've got this offensive line, it's just not, there's just a ceiling there, right? Like, you could put Jaden Daniels behind this offensive line and he would be good, because we saw Geno Smith be good. And I think Geno is very good. I don't think he's Jaden Daniels, but they're not in the NFC Championship game behind this offensive line. You just can't do it. It takes entire pages out of your playbook. And so I'm almost not super invested yet in who Seattle hires as their offensive coordinator. In fact, that kind of leads me towards Hank Fraley, if anything, because at least then you've got like an offensive line coach coming in. But I don't want my offensive coordinator spending all his time coaching up offensive linemen either. I want him calling fucking plays. So they're in a little bit of a tough spot, and it's been the same issue for the Seahawks for a decade. When they won their Super Bowl, they didn't have the best offensive line, but they had the highest paid offensive line. Now, granted, they were able to do that because all of their best skill position players were on rookie contracts. They just had like 7 Hall of Famers on rookie contracts. That helps. But as they started to pay those guys, they pulled from the offensive line piggy bank, and they've just never put that back in. And at this point, I agree with you. I think that, what I was talking about earlier, about how these teams are capable of putting you away when they have a lead or coming back when they're down. All 4 of these teams can do that, including, the Lions could do it, the Ravens could do it, the Rams could do it. Like, teams that lost last week, they're all capable of winning both types of ways. Well, you cannot do that unless you've got an offensive line that you can trust. And I think Howie Roseman is the pinnacle of roster construction right now, that's with respect to Les Snead and to John Lynch and some others out there. But they had a great offensive line, and then they were like, oh, your highly drafted left tackle didn't work out? Great. We could use a guard. Yep. Like, they keep drafting offensive linemen. They keep signing offensive linemen in free agency. Having enough is not enough, because all those guys get hurt. And when you get to this time of the year, it really is who's left. And it feels like you just can't have enough depth there.
No, well, and you brought up like the Hank Fraley appeal for a guy that hasn't called plays, but did hang out with Ben Johnson a lot, and I'm sure has some cool shit that he could tap into.
Sure.
If you were to go that route with him, you at least build the foundation the right way. And we're seeing right now in the NFL, whether it's on the offensive side of the football or the defensive side of the football, like, all these old cliches are more true now than they've ever been. If you can't run and stop the run, it baseline ruins your chances of having a good time. We've seen that with the Dallas Cowboys most recently, I think at the highest level, where that shits the bed and all of a sudden you have some real issues. But I think with Hank, like, you've got a guy who is a proven developer. Now, they had great talent at those positions as well. Don't get me wrong. Plenty of guys there between Decker and, Penei Sewell, arguably the most talented offensive lineman in the NFL pound for pound. But you got to get him coached up right away, get the continuity of that unit the right way. Health would go a long way for that for Seattle, who's got 2 good tackles when they're healthy and available on the field. It's just hardly ever been that way over the last couple of years. But again, having a teacher at that spot, because all that stuff you just mentioned about the Eagles, 90% of the NFL can't do that. 90% of the NFL had no idea what they could do with what was left of Mekhi Becton. They thought coming out of the New York Jets. Jeff Stoutland's like, all right, bet. Our left tackle is one of the best in the league, was a rugby player that we brought over here who happens to be one of the most insane athletes and is a beautiful golden voice. But an insane guy that I am going to teach how to play offensive line at an insanely high level because they've got that tool in the bag. So you got to know yourself enough to know what your primary need is. And that's why a guy like Hank Fraley, I think, is going to be the beneficiary of that this offseason because he's shown himself to be one of the unique commodities in being able to teach at a position that has a defined lack of teachers executing at a high level in the league right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. One of the takes I've been trying on for size and that I think fits pretty well this season is I think the next market inefficiency in the NFL is when you get a great coordinator or position coach, you just pay them a fuck ton of money to stay there because that's rounding errors to the owners, right? And if you're like, I don't know, 1.2 might be too much for a position coach. Fuck, man, if you've got the best position coach at that position in the NFL, I don't give a shit. Pay him head coaching money, right? Like, I mean, we've got the best head coaches in the NFL making guard money. And what's more important, right? Like, no knock on the guard, right? Like, the best off-ball linebackers in the NFL, it's like there are these giant gaps, in my opinion, that still exist in the NFL between what market says they should be paid and the effect that truly great ones at that position, the effect that can have on your team's success. But we never talk about it with positional coaches. We never talk about it with coordinators. And if you're the Lions, what's Chicago offering you to be their head coach? I'll pay you that plus 20% to stay here as the offensive coordinator, right? Like trying to do that. So yeah, I think that's going to be interesting. We harp a lot on the show about the very obvious defect that Seattle has. It's not their only one, but it's the offensive line. It's every year. That being said, is a team that won 10 games. They won 9 the year before. They won 9 the year before. It doesn't feel like they've got super far to go to become a contender. What, if any, parts of this Seahawks team do you think give them a chance? If they were to get the offensive line dialed, at least, let's say, close to league average, are there parts of this team that you see make them capable of making a playoff run?
Oh, yeah. I mean, God, there's a lot to like about this team. Good Lord, defensively, Leonard Williams, I was going on and doing hits early with Seattle radio every week, so I watched a lot more Seattle than I usually had. And getting an early ticket to the Leonard Williams show that really reared its head towards the end of the season. Awesome to watch him. Defensively, overall, they were dialed in. Jordan Love in the back end of that defense tackled really well all year long. But offensively, to me, it was the emergence of Jackson Smith-Njigba as a true wide receiver one type guy. Like, you got two ones on that team, and then the other guy in Tyler Lockett's only one of the best, most consistent receivers in franchise history. So I think if you get the foundation set, you got Ken Walker in the backfield, Zach Charbonnet did so well in his stead, you can see all of the parts around there that fit in really well where, hey, if you just get the foundation, like for Seattle, listen, if you got the O-line to dominate somehow, sure, great. If you can just get it to serviceable and consistent with the guys that you've got out there, especially guys that occupy every area of the field that's accessible to you, sky's the limit. But I think JSN and the way that he came on really added a different element to that offense and one that would be insane if you could just protect the quarterback for longer.
Did you see enough from Mike Macdonald in the first year to have faith moving forward there?
Big time. Yeah. And I mean, it's one of those things, too, to your point, because of his personality type, we're never going to know a ton about what's going on under the hood. Certainly the local folks that spend a lot of time around it are going to have a better idea. But I think the fact that, kind of like we talked about all the way back at the beginning, we didn't spend a lot of time, in my mind, nationally as a media, talking about Aaron Donald being gone with the Los Angeles Rams. We also didn't spend a lot of time talking about, oh, here's the rookie mistake that Mike Macdonald made as a coach. Here's this very clear thing that all of a sudden became a major talking point for a team that did win 10 games where their young head coach or their new head coach is holding them back. There were certainly things about the lines of scrimmage. People talked a lot about the defense because he was going to have a hand in that. But overall, I don't feel like we were having those, oh, these are clear growing pain moments that dominated headlines in the way that they can sometimes with a new head coach coming into the fold. And I think that's almost like being, a good offensive lineman. The less you're talked about in that regard, the better things are going usually.
Yeah, I think the thing that stood out to me about Mike Macdonald's first year that was most surprising because, look, the defense struggled, early, mid part of the season. But that's not unusual for everywhere Mike Macdonald has gone, whether it be Michigan or Baltimore, right? He's teaching them a completely different language. It's a much more binary approach to your responsibilities in defense as opposed to like a read and react. And you saw that start to take hold and they started to really hold teams, right? I think they had the best third down defense in the NFL. They certainly forced the most 3 and outs in the NFL. And that to me was encouraging, but also kind of what I expected. Like if you're going to pay $60 million to this defensive coordinator, the thing that impressed me so much was how reasonable he was with game management, with his timeout usage, with the type of plays that he wanted to run on both sides of the ball relative to how much time was left in the half. Not throwing away timeouts, not throwing away challenges, not being, as Pete Carroll was fond of calling himself, too hormonal in those situations. He was just so steady, so analytical. I mean, this is a guy who, I think was magna cum laude from an Ivy League school and turned down opportunities to be a financial quant in Manhattan, to be a freaking video assistant for the Ravens, right? To chase this dream, but you can see that same approach. It's the ability to calculate odds and apply them to decision-making in real time when there's this maelstrom going on around you that I think was most impressive to me. And for as hard as I've been lately on John Schneider for his inability to adequately address the offensive line, he's done a phenomenal job at the perimeters of his roster. Quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and secondary, he's done an awesome job of bringing in a lot of talent. They just don't have the sand in their pants to hang with these teams. And if he can beef that up, it does feel like, and hopefully the folks that listen to the show, watch the show regularly know, like, I'm not a rose-colored glasses guy with this team, but I'm not just going to shit on them unnecessarily either. This is still a team that, 11 of the last 13 seasons have had a winning record. There's a reason for that. I feel like the baseline is there. They've just been missing the key ingredient to elevate them. And I think at this point, everyone understands that it's the offensive line.
Yep. No, and that's kind of a great thing because, man, if you've got a lot of teams go into the offseason, you've got all these needs that you're trying to meet and all these different things you're trying to hit. And the fact that the answer is pretty clear on this one, and to your point, you have found a head coach that you trust as a lovable quant meathead who's also a really capable teacher, then it does feel like there's a lot to hold on. That was why I was big in the camp of, hey, let's just bring back Geno Smith. Like on his best day, we saw he's still a value add at that position. And I want that steady while I build up these other foundational parts that can allow me to, hey, in a couple of years when it is time to really make that transition, have our final form ready to go so that if we're bringing in a young guy or we're trying to slot in a vet who keeps us in contending mode, we're in a much better position to do that because we didn't spend all this time, bandwidth, and certainly capital going out here trying to find another quarterback in a market that I just think isn't going to have them this year.
Yeah, that's my thing, and I'm glad that we're not spending a ton of time on Geno Smith in this show because we've done that so much in so many other episodes, and it's a worthy conversation. But I also think it's the wrong conversation because I get that Geno Smith is not Joe Burrow. I get that he's not Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. But if you think if you think you're putting those guys for however much money and trade capital it would take to get them behind this offensive line, you're not going to get what we've seen from them.
Yep.
Yes, there would probably be an increase in quarterback performance, but quarterback performance is not your issue. And Geno Smith is not going to cost what those guys cost. It's the wrong question to be asking. And also, I've yet to hear no, you cut Geno, and then here's what you do. You draft this guy, or you sign this guy in free agency. Those paths do not appear available to me right now. So I am glad that you said that because, look, I find myself kind of painted into a corner where when I defend against the idea that Geno Smith sucks, I come off sounding like, oh, he's elite and you never have to think about an alternative. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it is so low on the list of this team's priorities. You have a good quarterback who has been performing well in awful conditions behind this offensive line. Don't fuck with that until you absolutely need to, and until you've built a house that the new quarterback can comfortably move into. All right. So just two quick things before we get you out of here. Super Bowl prediction. Here's how I'm going to frame it. If you get the exact right outcome, who beats who in the Super Bowl, you're going to win $50,000. But if you don't, you have to spend a week sleeping in the Atlanta airport.
Oh, Christ. All right. Wow. You know what? And the part of this that bums me out is I used to be a guy that I watched The Terminal with Tom Hanks, and I thought I could do this. Like I spent a lot of time in airports. I'm pretty savvy about all the spots where you can eat, where you can lay down on the ground. I'm not averse to germs like that. I got checked so hard in the Atlanta airport. So a week in Hartsfield, Jackson.
Yep.
In all of its glory, if I get this wrong, God, you know what? I know we've talked about it over and over again. Betting against the Chiefs, bad idea. Like, if I'm trying to avoid the airport, I would have the Chiefs win over the Eagles in the Super Bowl. I think that would be a rematch of the 2022 Super Bowl. I think one where, quite honestly, we went through that game. You know, that was the one got Jalen Hurts paid, largely outplayed.
One of the best football games
Mahomes.
I've ever watched.
It was remarkable. I don't know if we're tapping back into that, especially if this leg injury were to persist through this game, even with some of the gap in the lead up to that game. I still think the Chiefs being able to eke out a win in that one would not be surprising to me, even though if maybe you weren't threatening me with a week in Hartsfield, Jackson, I might say, hey, maybe this Eagles roster and all its health in the right places and all its foundational reset with these young guys. Because remember, it wasn't just offensively. Like Fletcher Cox, big loss in that room. Brandon Graham injury, big loss in that D-line room. And all these young Georgia Bulldogs that they drafted finally coming online against a Chiefs team that has had some issues up front. I could make a bunch of compelling cases there. But if you're asking me to try and avoid the Atlanta airport, I'd probably just say, hey, the Chiefs do the three-peat. And then next year, we probably start to have some real conversations about, hey, is Travis Kelce going to actually hang him up potentially? Hey, are you going to have to really address some of the things offensively? Because I don't think you're going to be able to do another year of getting by in the margins the way they did this year.
I mean, look, the Chiefs didn't get out of bed in the regular season and they won 15 games.
Yeah.
Like they sleepwalked to 15 wins. It's incredible. And it's the reason that I frame the question that way is it's fun to be like, it'd be cool if the Commanders won the Super Bowl. Why not? I'll throw it out there. Commanders over Bills. Let's do it. It's like, no. If there's real stakes, something you really want to avoid on the line, you do not want to be rooting against Patrick Mahomes in that situation. I'm with you. It's Chiefs over Eagles for me.
Yeah.
I want to tell you literally any other combination.
And there's a bunch of justifications for every other combination. Like that's the beauty of this Final Four and maybe Washington's probably the one we put a little further behind. And the spread of that game is clearly indicative of that.
Yep.
But of Philadelphia, Buffalo, or Kansas City, I could sell you on any three of those teams winning the Super Bowl and feel like I'm making a very logical argument about it.
100%. Last question for you. Who gets your MVP vote, and did that change last weekend?
Didn't change last weekend, though. It's still Lamar Jackson. I mean, it's a regular season award, and he is a quarterback that I think going back to the Rams game last year has elevated his game in such a way where, and I said this, if Lamar Jackson, because we know part of this is postseason accomplishment based, if Lamar Jackson had gone out and managed to win a Super Bowl this year behind all this play, Mahomes is still the big bad on the block, but it's much closer to like a 1B situation, or at the very least a defined like, hey, Patrick Mahomes until further notice, but Lamar Jackson is in that next tier all by himself in terms of quarterback, because ability-wise, he is to Patrick Mahomes as Aaron Rodgers used to be to Tom Brady, where didn't have the hardware, but even Patrick Mahomes, who was the ability guy before Lamar Jackson came and became the super ability guy, can go out here and make him look more mortal in certain areas just because the threat of run is so spectacular for him. And the passing attack has grown leaps and bounds the way people hoped it would post Greg Roman. And so, yeah, I would give it to Lamar Jackson. Passing numbers that dwarf last year's MVP season, a much more overt showcase of that skills, and still a bunch of wins to go along with it.
Yeah, I agree, man. I think that if it were up to me, I would be forced to acknowledge that Josh Allen just had the greatest non-MVP season that I can remember. But it's because Lamar Jackson was that good. And the last thing that I'll say on that is I was really bracing myself after that game Sunday night for more Lamar can't get it done in the playoffs. And, you know, he's chokes, he's a regular season artist. And there's some of that out there because, you know, everyone gets a voice now. And not everyone should have a voice. I'm sorry. That's my unpopular opinion. But but everyone does. So, yeah. So there's some of that out there. But I think among the ball knowers who had that question, even the way that they saw him handle that final drive and the fact that they, like, yes, he had 2 turnovers in that game, no question. And Josh Allen didn't. I'm not taking anything away from Josh Allen. Josh Allen had 127 passing yards and 20 rushing yards in that game. His teammates helped him win that game so much more than Lamar Jackson's teammates did. And the most common argument I've heard for Josh Allen all year was, well, Lamar's got a better team around him. And whether or not that's true, that was not true last week. And I don't get the sense that the football community is any longer feeling like Lamar Jackson can't get it done, because I think he did get it done in that game.
Nope, I would agree, and I think that requires, you know, a level of watching the games and not just picking it up the next day and seeing the box score. But I think you're right. I think the problem we always have in the postseason is it's a much smaller sample size, but the games are prorated in all of our opinions. And not all of that is wrong. I remember having a conversation about this with Dan Orlovsky at ESPN, just about the difference between starters and backups in the NFL. And he said, all told, it's usually like a difference of 5 plays a game. Like, most NFL backups can go out there and operate the offense and do some things. But when you really got to step up and make those 5 or 6 plays that are going to impact the outcome of a game in a high leverage moment, that's the difference. And that's what we start talking about between, hey, great players and the all-timers. And because we've got an all-timer in Pat that everyone else is graded against right now, this is why some of this other stuff feels so dire, because that's the standard we're holding everyone up against. And it's not always fair, but a fair is a place where they judge pigs. So what does that matter?
I can't think of a better line to end this show on. Mike, listen, man, that's going to do it for us today. But Mike, thank you so much for your time after just a nightmare travel situation coming home.
This was a much better conversation than the ones I had to have with angry passengers in the gate, handing out. One guy literally printed out the instructions on how to file a complaint with the Department of Transportation and was explaining that to me while I tried to sleep at 3 a.m. So this markedly better than that. Thank you for having me back. I really appreciate it.
Oh, good. I'm so glad that I cleared that bar. Good. All right. Yeah. That's going to be the tagline for this show. Yeah. Yeah.
Like Alabama against Notre Dame 2012 better than that. How about that?
Yeah. Yeah. Who played in that game? All right. So. Damn it. I'm sorry, man. I don't mean to send you out like that. All right. Listen, I'm going to let you go sleep. But first, where can the folks find more of you and your work?
Yeah, at Mike Golic Jr. on all social media is a good home base for everything. At Gojo and Golic is the social media handle for the show. We're on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. You can check us out on our YouTube channel there as well, Monday through Friday, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on the DraftKings Network. Me, Dad, a bunch of our friends coming through. It's a good time, and we try not to take ourselves too seriously, as evidenced by my entire existence on this podcast today.
One last huge thank you to Mike Golic Jr. for his time at the end of a terrible day of traveling. It means a lot that he carved it out in his schedule, as tired as he was. He was killer today. Look, as always, you can find Mike and I on social media as well. I am on Twitter and Blue Sky at Jacson.and. That's Jacson. Remember that no K is okay when spelling my name. Mike is on both at Mike Barwin, and the show itself is at Cigar Thoughts on Twitter and at Cigar Thoughts NFL on Blue Sky. You can catch full video episodes on our YouTube channel at Cigar Thoughts. Find the rest of our socials at cigarthoughtsnfl.com. As mentioned previously, this episode is brought to you by Glenfiddich Premium Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. Y'all know I'm a huge fan of their lineup, and we are thrilled to have them on board as a sponsor of the show. One of the great things about a great scotch is how well it plays with a good cigar, so once again, we do have our own special release of cigars that you can purchase at a terrific price as a listener of the show. The release of these Cigar Thoughts Stogies has been successful enough for us to continue offering them for the low price of $149. That's right, just $149 for a bundle of 10. As many of you know, we partnered with one of the most prestigious cigar manufacturers in the world to release these official Cigar Thoughts cigars, which you can order directly from cigarthoughtsnfl.com. Just follow the link on the show page to get these easy-to-smoke stogies rolled with 13-year aged premium Dominican tobacco leaf, or hit us up on Twitter or Instagram. We'll send you the details directly. The cigars come with a Boveda humidification pack and a Mylar storage bag to make sure they stay fresh whether you have a humidor or not. Of course, you can listen to this show and read every article at fieldgoals.com. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and you like the show, drop us a 5-star rating and leave a quick review. Thank you to all of y'all listening for your continued support of the show. We know you've only got so much time for podcasts in your life, and it's an honor to be a part of that for y'all. Please know that by sharing this show on social media and with your friends, you give us the juice to keep making this happen. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, onwards and upwards, my friends.